serious, Redditors who work at cemeteries and graveyards, what strange and scary stuff have you witnessed? Roverin. My great-great-grandfather and his son were foremen at the cemetery in my hometown, of course way before I was ever around. The older of them was said to be sensitive, as in he felt and saw things, and there are stories of people that he buried that came by during nights to tell him that they were cold, which means that there were no flowers/reeds on the grave, or that their feet were cold, the soil around where the foot of the casket was had leveled. He was also said to be able to see people in what we refer to as hamper, skin journey, as in the body shows itself to tell someone that the soul has departed. One particular story about that they still tell around a Sunday dinner table is when a friend of his had been lost at sea. Nobody knew of course until much later, but my 2xg grandfather saw his friend entering the house, drenched in seawater, and noisily walk into the living room and sits himself on an old sailor's chest that was by the door, and just as soon the man disappears. My great-grandfather took over his father's job when he got too old to do it. I can't remember any similar stories about him, but there is a joke about some youngsters that tried to scare him that people have told all over the country, probably an imported joke. There were a few people in town that didn't like the fact that the graveyard workers worked after dark, and there were a group of young men that decided that enough was enough. They were going to scare the gravedigger. So they outfitted themselves with white sheets and went to the graveyard and walked around the graveyard saying all sorts of ghostly sounds like "Buh," and they found a gravedigger as he was in the middle of digging a grave by hand, and they stood around the grave for what seemed like hours, shouting and screaming and doing whatever it is that ghosts do. The gravedigger paid them no mind and just continued with his work. The young men then, having given up, started to leave, and as they approached the gate of the graveyard they could hear shouting and protesting behind them, as the gravedigger angrily came running towards them, shouting, "It's one thing that you are up and about walking around here, but don't you think for a second that I will allow you to leave." White Claw Law. My dad purchased a cemetery when I was in middle school, and I worked for him through high school graduation. I did yard work, mowing, weed eating, flower beds, etc. Aside from the occasional shadow seen out of the corner of my eye, seeing people who turned out to not be there, and hearing strange sounds, the cemetery was actually a quite peaceful place. But the strangest is when you have a burial in the crypts. Basically, you dig down about 4 or 5 feet to expose giant cement doors. You pull the cement doors off and drop down into a little room. These rooms can fit 2 coffins, or years and years worth of cremated remains. So back in the 50s and 60s, families would buy one crypt and the entire fam would be cremated and put in it. Some just put the cremated remains in it and close her up, but others light candles and leave flowers and souvenirs and pictures and shit. It's fucking creepy opening up one of those bad boys after 50 years and finding melted candles and old pictures of the people inside. Plus when you hop down in there you have a weird realization that you are at the same level and completely surrounded by bodies. Edit. Rip my inbox. Thanks for the silver kind stranger. And just to clarify, I am originally from the Midwest, so weed eating is a relatively normal term used to say you're going to go whack some weeds. POF_no. When I was in college I worked part-time at a Jewish cemetery in reception/office management. The cemetery was closed from Friday afternoon through Saturday evening for Sabbath. We sometimes stayed a bit later in the office on Friday afternoons to get bills out or checks processed. We heard a loud commotion by the cemetery entrance which was locked and only staff could get in and out. The office manager went to see what was going on and made me come with her. We went down to the gate to find an older woman, probably around 70, dressed to the nines begging us to let her in. She kept saying she needed to get back. This was in the suburbs of New Jersey, so you needed a car to get around, but we didn't see a car or anything. She was just there in this beautiful dress. We couldn't open the gate without the cemetery manager, so we went to go get him. We brought him back to the gate and no one was there. We looked at video footage of the entrance and you could see us, the office manager and me, talking, but there was no one on the other side of the gate. The cemetery manager thought we were trying to trick him. I swear to this day we saw a woman in a fancy dress outside that gate. There were multiple cameras and not a single one picked up anyone on the other side of the gate, and you could see the whole gate. All you could see was us. I don't know if it was a ghost or what. The office manager and I decided not to tell anyone else, but we would mention it to each other every once in a while. Freddy 30234. I was a tombstone caretaker for a cemetery in rural Georgia. Summertime job for a 16-year-old, nothing crazy, just cleaning off the grime of the elements on tombstones etc. Now to just put a setting, the cemetery included one building that housed bathrooms for the 5 staff members of the cemetery, a small simple mausoleum, and then other than that, flat earth with tombstones everywhere. The only surroundings were dense forests in the Georgia country. That being said, due to the eerie surroundings, I was always a bit paranoid, plus I watch a lot of scary movies and so on. I know, bad combo. So one night I was doing my rounds, and I had to go into the small mausoleum, had some of the richer families in the areas entombed within, and I had to go in, make sure all was neat and clean. Standards had to be upheld for these uppity folks. So I approached, and right off the bat, something was off. The air was pretty damn cold, during the summer in Georgia. That was odd. There was a light coming from the mausoleum, and as I approached, I had voices, laughter. Laughter from a child, a little girl. I thought it was simply younger folks maybe. I haven't seen anyone enter or leave the cemetery, and the laughter sounded young. However, as I got closer, the voices and laughter died, like almost instant. I paused. The light I also noticed had gone out. I called the lone security officer that does a few rounds on the lot, cause I'm not gonna go in alone, and he comes. We will call him Officer Friendly. When Officer Friendly arrives, we both go inside. We see one of the doors to the entombed remains of a young girl, open. Nothing was disturbed within, but it was open, and a doll lay on the stone beneath it. Me and Officer Friendly do a small sweep. It was only 1 floor and 1 room, so it didn't take long. We close the door to the girl's entombment, and we both leave. As we walk away, we get about 30 feet from the mausoleum, and then all of a sudden, boom, voices and laughter again. I jump, and Officer Friendly looks to me, looking pretty shaken, says to me, "You hear it too?" We look back, and boom, lights back, laughter continuing. We don't go back and just book it. I found out the next morning, the door was open again. This time the doll was on the other side of the mausoleum from where we found it the night before. I resigned the next day. I'm good LOL. Anger is my default mode. My mom and stepdad were the caretakers of a small cemetery for about 10 years. All of us kids, 6 between the two of them, helped out at one point or another. One summer I was helping my mom with mowing and upkeep. It was a super hot summer, so we would try to go and get the mowing done early before the heat became too unbearable. Well, we had trouble getting the truck going one day, so we ended up starting a little later than usual and were unable to finish up everything that day. My mom had an appointment the next morning, and the day after that it was supposed to rain, so I told her I would go up early the next morning and finish up the trimming with the weed eater. So, it's about 7 in the morning and I am listening to music with my headphones and going around the headstones. Everything was going well until I got to the oldest section of the cemetery. That part was on a small slope of a hill. Once you got to the bottom and looked up, you couldn't see the road, but you could see it again once you were about halfway up. When I finished up the last headstone, I turned off my equipment and started back up the hill. I glanced up in time to see a little girl in a pretty red dress. She was running and disappeared behind a large headstone. I figured her parents were visiting another grave and the little girl ran off to entertain herself. It was around 9 a.m. at this point. I got to the top of the hill and there was no car or people around. The cemetery wasn't really close to any houses, and the girl was too nicely dressed to have walked out there. I looked around and shouted for her to come out. I was able to see the headstone she ran behind, and I would have seen her if she ran out again. I couldn't find her anywhere. I called my mom and told her what was going on and asked if I should call the police and tell them about this little girl. She looked to be about 3 or 4 years old, so she certainly shouldn't be by herself. My mom asked me if she was wearing a red dress. I said yes. What? So, she proceeds to nonchalantly tell me that was just the ghost girl. Now, everyone who knows me knows that I don't fuck with ghosts. I asked why she didn't tell me there was a ghost in the cemetery. She said she needed my help and was afraid I wouldn't go up if Elle thought it was haunted. Now granted, I probably would have been more leery of the place, but knowing no one else could help her, I would have still helped her that summer, but I would have made sure I wasn't there by myself. I still go there sometimes as I have relatives buried there, but I am always with someone. Fortunately, I never saw any other ghosts and I have never seen the little ghost girl ever again. Ponsarsanarum. I was walking along Ridge Road past one of the oldest cemeteries in Durban, and I noticed a pickup being loaded with cast iron grave furniture, railings, footings, etc. I was concerned this might be a big theft in progress, so I went in to investigate. The chap in charge of the operation told me that constant theft, usually by youngsters wielding sledgehammers and cold chisels, to sell to scrap metal dealers, led to so much damage that they were removing the remaining metal to prevent further incidental damage. He showed me around, and I saw one above ground enclosure that had been chiseled open. The little funeral chapel had been locked, but the thieves removed some roof tiles and got in that way. BTW, if you are at all interested, check out Caitlin Dowdy's YouTube channel, Ask a Mortician. She has also written Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, and other tales from the crematorium. Her latest is entitled Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? Edit. This graveyard also contains a memorial to Lieutenant Francis Farewell, a British naval officer turned missionary. He and his party went to Patagonia and tried to convert the local inhabitants, alienated them, and were stuck in an inhospitable land waiting for a ship carrying supplies that didn't arrive in time. Darr died because Christian Victorian colonial now Itals.